Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the pleasure to welcome Ms. Shana Wills. Ms. Shana Wills, she is the executive director and founder of the no-profit organization based here in Chicago called Reach. Ms. Shana, thank you very much for joining me on the Human Rights Tree.
Thank you, Alpha. It's my pleasure to be here.
Each year, many thousands of asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants come to America. When they come to America, often they face challenges. Among those challenges are language barriers, cultural differences, religious differences. Some go through the process with the help of certain organizations in the easy way. Others face difficult challenges. Today, I would love to talk about the resettlement issue in Chicago. But before I go deep into the issue, I just want to know who is the person behind the title? Who is Ms. Shana?
I'm not sure how to respond to that in a succinct manner, Alpha. I've been working on issues of displacement for my entire adult career, so that's over 30 years now, working both in war-torn areas of sub-Saharan Africa with displaced children and some adults, and then working here in the city of Chicago formerly as the director of a large resettlement agency, and then also as the director of an international newcomer center with Chicago Public Schools. And most recently, I started Reach, Refugee Education Adventure Challenge, because of a need I thought needed to be filled.
I see. I would like to go in the beginning of the journey. Were you born in Chicago?
I was born on the south side of Chicago.
Okay. So when was your first encounter with refugee or the refugee work?
My first encounter wasn't it was something that happened to me in my junior year of high school. Somebody from the Chicago News came to our school to do an assembly to tell us about the work that he had just done to cover the Ethiopian famine. And he showed us vivid photographs of what he had just come from. And it was of many young women and children truly suffering and trying to escape for their lives to find some sort of sustenance. And that impacted me very deeply. And at that moment, at that very moment, I told all of my classmates, this is the work I'm gonna do. But my first encounter with a refugee wasn't until probably around the late 80s. I volunteered with a literacy organization here in Chicago in order to kind of meet refugees and newcomers and provide individualized tutoring to them. And then from there, I went off to do my work in Africa.
So basically, if I have a better understanding, in high school, you hear about the Ethiopian crisis, and further you did little volunteering in the Chicago area, and after that you decided to go to Africa and do more work on the thing. Can you give us 2 specific dates? When was in high school, when each
year was Thank you so much. 1984
okay.
Was the year, I believe. It was either 84 or 85, whenever the famine was really, I think it was right around that was the time of the Ethiopian famine crisis. So that was when that newscaster came to visit. And ironically, many years later, like 20 years later, I reached out to him when he was still with one of the channels and told him how much he impacted me. So it was really fun to do that. But hey, 1984, 1985, and then I started volunteering with, I think it might not have been called Literacy Chicago then, but it was something like that in 1988 or 89. And then I left to do work in Angola in 1992. And I returned in late 1996. And then I kept working back and forth in different parts of Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Eritrea, South Africa, while also working here and going to grad school.
I see. Volunteering. Often we engage on act of volunteering. What did you, and when do volunteer, often you see it as helping people. But what I learned through doing volunteering, you are helping, but in some time you are learning as well. When you were encountering, when you were doing your volunteering work and helping refugees and things, what did you learn?
Well, that was exactly why I wanted to become a tutor for limited English proficient individuals, because I knew I wanted to go and do this work. And I thought, how can I go and do this work never having any personal conversations with the people that I'm honestly trying to go and assist, or at least work together with? So that was my motivation. It was my motivation to learn. Yeah, I hope to be able to teach them some English and to help them with their pathway to integration. But I definitely knew that this was going to be a learning process. And so for me, I do recall very vividly, my first few students were from, they were exiled from the Philippines. And it was a mother with children who was exiled from Ethiopia. How about that? One of my first students was an Ethiopian mother.
After hearing the Ethiopian news.
Yeah. And yeah, so for me, it was more of like, I learned a lot going into people's homes, sitting with them and having tea, getting to know how they manage their children in a kind of a stressful environment, having those fun little conversations that were just, quirky and human. That in itself was informative for me and transformative for me.
As a person who was born in Chicago, especially in the south side of Chicago, and grew up in the city of Chicago, how was the idea of leaving America and going to another continent called Africa? Was it like, I'm ready for it, or was it a little bit intimidating?
So you're talking to somebody who I didn't come up the same way as a lot of folks in this work, perhaps. And I have kind of a whole backstory about my own childhood, but I was very much involved with the Chicago art scene, and I was kind of a rebel without a cause. And so as a rebel within this art scene, I did performance art. I hung out with a lot of the different bands that were in the city, and we were doing a lot of stuff that was focused on anti-apartheid, anti-book banning, all that kind of stuff. So I was a rebel alpha, in which case the rebel spirit in me said, I want to go and do this work where there aren't any Americans to kind of jade me or, disrupt my ability to learn for real. And so I was very happily engaged in like going overseas. There was not a bit of trepidation. I honestly say that I did not have any trepidation about leaving. I really was excited to learn. And I really wanted to be. I will say though, when I did first get to Angola, the war broke out. It broke out before there was a period of peace, and then right before I was supposed to board the plane, the war broke out again. And so there was the fear of entering a war zone. But I'm sorry if I'm not answering your question. There wasn't a lot of trepidation about actually going. I was really eager to learn.
I think you are answering the question. You were carried by your rebellistic spirit, and you wanted to see the world. And through that process, you choose Angola. When was it, and how was your experience landing in Angola? If I'm not mistaken, in Angola also they speak Portuguese.
They speak Portuguese, yes.
How was your, which year was it, and how was your experience living in that environment?
So I was to leave for Angola in 1992, and in 1992, November, the country had elections, and the rebel leader did not agree with the results of those elections, and so it immediately went back to war. So my planes were canceled, and I actually set foot in Angola in January of 1993. And I set foot in Angola when there were hundreds of thousands of people that were dying each day from hunger, from actual physical contact with the war, from cholera, from all the diseases that are exploited during the war. It was a miserable time in that country, but it was also a fantastic time because people really showed their true spirit, and that true spirit was very much about lifting each other up and protecting each other and trying to make sure that each individual was able to survive. So I got caught up. But my first experience, though, with setting foot in Angola was just wild and awestruck because there was so much going on and so much happening. And it was hard for my, precious little American brain to rationalize the fact that people still lived their lives and there was still all this activity and there was still all this commerce and so much happening. And yet there was a war going on at the same time, like a very significant war that was destroying most of the country. That was really it immediately opened my mind to the way that the world worked. And simultaneous to that, Alpha, I'm working in this country where there is no American representation. Bill Clinton came into office late that year. He opened up a consulate, not an embassy. There was no embassy. There were many Americans who were working there covertly, and they did not want my American presence there. But I was there with a Danish organization, so I was allowed to stay. It was a very, I think people underestimate just how significant something like that can be to an individual. And for me, that basically imprinted my commitment to working on these issues for the rest of my life.
So you went there to work for an organization. And what is the name of the organization and what the organization purpose was in Angola?
So I worked with an organization that's focus was on assisting and serving the frontline states of Southern Africa that were fighting against apartheid. Okay. And the organization was based in Denmark. It has a kind of a mysterious reputation. I'd prefer not to name it just because I don't know how I feel about that organization, and I don't really want to give them much publicity.
Okay, no problem. So how many years or months you stayed in Angola?
I was there off and on for 4 years. Okay. I was first started in the capital, and I was working at a school for children who were orphaned by the war and also children who were fleeing the interior. And so it was a combination of war orphans and street children. And I then was asked to go and start my own project in a different province. And I started from scratch a school for children who were fleeing the interior. And that was for 100 kids with an accelerated curriculum. That was a combination of the Angolan curriculum and also experiential learning.
I will take the opportunity to ask you to be a painter for a moment. Can you do a painting between Miss Sana, who went to Angola in his early years, and Miss Sana, who basically after 4 years left Angola to come back, I guess, in the United States? What changed? How do you transform yourself? How those two people can be in the same body but think differently?
Well, when I first went to Angola, I told you I was a rebel spirit, and that meant I was like eager to learn, but also angry. And I guess it was displaced anger, not knowing where to put that anger, right? And then 4 years later, I realized where to put that anger. It was in fighting for people's rights and demanding that change happen. And that was pretty significant for me. Those 4 years changed my understanding of what each citizen of the world, the capacity of each of us to actually make change. Maybe it's not ginormous change, but it's, you can make small changes in the world. And I believe that so strongly. And I learned that from living in Angola for so long, and working in other, countries. But primarily I learned that there, even during a war, even when nothing was working, when the inflation rates were skyrocketing every day, we were barely able to, purchase equipment and food, et cetera, barely unable to pay teachers. Still, we taught children. Still, we built a school. Still, we fed them every day. And that was the will of people who just wanted to make it happen despite the chaos. And that taught me that you can make things happen despite the chaos.
What I'm learning through your journey and experience is that we as a people, despite difficulties and challenges we face, we can be very resilient. And the other things I'm learning is it's good to have anger, but we should put those anger into good cause. And I believe it's what you try to do. You came back to Chicago, and today you are known as the founder and the executive director of the nonprofit organization called Reach. Why you see the need of creating such organization?
Well, Reach is designed to address a specific series of gaps that I witnessed and my colleagues in the field, all of us witnessed, and we articulated it very many times about a gap in services and an understanding of adolescents, refugee and asylum-seeking adolescents in particular, that stage of preteen through adolescence and early adulthood, that everyone makes the assumption that those are the people who are going to adapt quickly, they learn the language fast, they're the cultural brokers for their families, they're great, everything's great with them, they're gonna do well. It's the moms and dads and grandparents that we need to worry about because it's gonna be harder for them to get jobs, harder for them to learn English. But with that sentiment, people were forgetting to really take a close look at how kids were adapting and integrating into an American society and into American school systems. And I watched with my colleagues far too many children get lost in the system. And kind of a breaking point for me was when a very close friend of mine, who was a refugee, who had raised his children, who he brought from his country of origin, to the US. He'd raised them to, teen years. And one of his children was walking down the street in Edgewater and was shot and killed on a Sunday morning. And when that happened, it wasn't the first that had been killed in that shocking kind of manner, but it was somebody who I knew personally, who I really knew well. And the fact that his child was peripherally involved in any way, shape, or form with Chicago gangs, and the fact that this family had risked everything to get here and to put everything that they had into building a home here, and then to have one of their children lost to gunfire in Chicago, it just put it into place that, yeah, I might just be one person, Alpha, I might just be one person, but I had enough experience on the ground to have seen the repeated kind of incidents that were happening with refugee and asylum seeking youth to realize that I needed to create something to fill that gap. I questioned myself because I've always said that I would never create my own organization because there are outstanding organizations that already exist, but I didn't see an organization that existed that was addressing this particular issue. There wasn't anybody. Nobody in Chicago was addressing that specific issue. And I knew I had to create something. And fortunately, the colleagues in my world were all phenomenal people who saw this as well and who were willing to actually sit on my founding board. And so I didn't do it alone. I had a founding board that believed in this idea.
So basically, I think before going into creating a nonprofit organization, you did experience teenagers, young refugees facing different issues through the process of resettling in the city of Chicago. And you entertained the idea, look around, and didn't see any organization who was handling those issues, and you decided that you want to create a nonprofit organization. How many months, how many years did you basically think about it, think about it, reflect before you decided, look, whatever it's going to take, I'm going to take on the challenge and do the best I can to address the issue? How long it take you?
Well, listen, 2003, I started working as the director of the Resettlement Agency, where my staff would come to me upset when they were trying to enroll children into school because principals didn't want to enroll limited English proficient refugee kids into their schools at the time, because No Child Left Behind supposedly principals were supposed to have a certain amount of good grades. You know, they had to keep in the system, and they didn't want those kids to ruin their test scores. I watched that happen, and then I went into work in the Chicago Public Schools, and I watched as children's cultural backgrounds and the nuances of their experiences were not understood or accepted by the staff, and even some of the teachers who wanted to do well but didn't understand how they were left behind because of those misconceptions. So that was 2003, then that was 2011, and then in 2013 in December. So I thought about it, but I was like, there's no way I'm going to create my own organization. I mean, I just can't do it. But December 2013, my son's child was killed, and I started having conversations, and I decided what I was going to do. I knew what I wanted to do in December of 2013. I needed to create an organization. What kind of organization? What can make it unique? How can I really touch these kids? How can I really have an impact? And simultaneous to that, my whole personal life, I'm raising a son by myself, and I'm taking my kid out everywhere. We go camping, we go hiking, we go kayaking. I'm an outdoors person. And I watch my child just like blossom while we're outdoors. And I know how I feel. And so my thought was, I'm going to get as many certifications and learn as much as I can about some of these outdoor sports. And I will see if I can do it. And then maybe I'll try to explore the idea of starting an organization. I ran a pilot program of Reach in summer of 2015. So that gives you an idea. December 2013 is when I had the idea. And by June of 2015, I was running a pilot.
I see. Eventually, you put your dream into reality, and you end up creating a nonprofit organization called Reach. Why the name?
Oh, I was just trying to think of something that was aspirational for the young people who were going to be joining it. So what are we reaching for? What can you accomplish here? What can your life entertain? And then also reach, meaning let's reach them. Let's get them before we lose them. Let's make sure that we catch them before they fall, right? So reach them.
I see. So what the meaning behind Reach? What is the full name of
The full
Reach?
name is Refugee Education and Adventure Challenge. And so the idea behind that is, we're providing education and adventure sports, introducing refugee kids and their families to education, outdoor education, and adventure sports outside the traditional classroom.
As a founder of organization, often when people create organizations, they have a vision. They dream of a perfect world. And this is going to be the the pinnacle of their achievement. What is the vision of your organization, Rich?
Well, when I tried to decide what the makeup of Reach was going to be, I reflected on two different things. One is that over those years that I told you, working as the director of those different agencies, what always happened was staff and I would always sit back and go, gosh, if only we could get some of these moms and kids outside of the city. If we could just get them to go like hang out at a park, and spend the night there, or go to, Ravinia and watch this beautiful music, we would do some of that. But I had this thought, like, how therapeutic could it be just to get people out of the city and into nature? But simultaneous to that, we have what a lot of us believe is a climate crisis. And I thought to myself, I want the refugee youth that we work with to have an education and understanding of this planet and the earth that we live on and the natural world, because I truly believe that most people will be eventually thinking about this more frequently, and there will be more jobs and opportunities to transition into as we continue to, unfortunately destroy our planet. And so that was kind of part of the reason, I thought that nature could be therapeutic, but I also thought that having young people learn about these things at an early age, especially refugees who aren't typically introduced to this, but who have a lot of cultural knowledge of it, I feel like there's an organization that could potentially have legs.
To your point, I can even share a personal experience because I grew up in Africa. And in Africa, we are the image of United States is through Hollywood movies. And often we see United States through big cities, Chicago, LA, New York, because often the movies are made on those big cities. And when many of us, when we come to United States, we stay in the big cities, and the relative we have also live in the big cities. And our world, basically, even if we want to travel, is around the big cities. But in my case, I love nature, and I have been trying to do the best to go to different parks in the state level. But when COVID came, basically, I did have the chance to go visit national parks. And
good.
In many ways, people will say COVID was very, very, very bad. But when COVID talk about, I say, well, COVID was one of the reasons that allowed me to travel around the country and see parks like Yellowstone and all those different. So in many ways, COVID was a trigger for me to meet nature around the country and see how beautiful the country can be. But to come to
well, how did that make you feel? How did that make you feel?
I enjoy it, and each year I have that desire of visiting one park or two, because I was fascinated by the beauty outside the cities, and I realized how much I lost. I cannot say lose, but I lost a huge opportunity. And I think having organizations that are advocating the kids, the refugees, don't stay in the cities and sit in your TV. There is the outside world out there in the country that you can enjoy, I think is a good thing. As an organization, what are the mission of your organization?
So our mission is to inspire leadership, academic success, and connections among refugee youth through active, dynamic learning outside the traditional classroom. We really are focused on getting the kids outside, but also teaching them new skills that are focused on anything from STEAM education, sciences, outdoor art, adventure sports, survival skills, everything and anything. And then a huge part of that, obviously, that comes with it is leadership. And so we have a very strong leadership component that's part of the organization, which means that our young people who grow into peer mentors or youth leaders steer their own projects, and they also steer the vision for the organization. So they do a lot of service learning projects for the community and stewardship projects for the natural environment.
I see. Because of my love for nature, after all those experiences, I end up writing a blog about walking into the Moring Hill State Park. I wrote about it, and the view I have is you cannot love something you don't know, and to love something you must know it. And I think your organization taking these kids in the park is triggering the love for the environment. And often when you love something, you want to protect it. And I is the connection. So what are the goals you are trying to pursue as an organization?
So our goals are to reduce youth isolation, to increase connections to self, to others, and to the earth, to increase skills that will help them with potential careers or academic futures in fields of natural resources, arts, engineering. It's to help them to introduce their families to opportunities and health and wellness benefits, and there's a whole slew of things that we want to accomplish. But what you mentioned when you talked about the story that you wrote and connecting people so that they can feel a love for the country, obviously that's one of the more outstanding goals of REACH. Is you can't love it's exactly that. You can't know a country, you can't love a country, you can't call someplace home if you only know this little tiny compartment of it, and if you don't recognize that there's so much more. And I think I wanted to remark that one of the really great things that happened this summer in particular, we take our leaders out to national parks, and I'm aware of your time, so I'm going to be short, but we take them out. Our goal is to take our youth leaders. They actually plan their own trips throughout the year. They have to plan their budgets. They have to reserve the campgrounds. They have to decide where we're going. They have to decide what kind of activities we're going to do. And so 2 years in a row now, the kids have very specifically organized trips to Yellowstone National Park, to Grand Teton. Closer by, we went to, we'd go to Indiana Dunes National Park, Badlands, different parts of South Dakota, different parts of Kentucky. The kids that went this year, we really tried to hone in on the indigenous people that came before us and really show the historical background. So not just the indigenous, but also the explorers, the European explorers who came through, like Lewis and Clark, and really give them that history lesson while we were adventuring outdoors. And one thing that we had a closing reflection around the campfire after our final trip this summer. And I've got kids from Sudan, I've got kids from Afghanistan, I've got kids from Iraq. They're all sitting around this campfire, and they're saying that the one thing that they will never forget is that they have to respect and feel grateful to the indigenous people who fought so long and hard to protect those lands, those sacred lands, so that people like us, all of us, can go and enjoy those places and still breathe it in and feel the peace and feel the love and the beauty. And that was an outstanding outcome. And for me, God, I can't think of any other better goal, is for them to make a connection, that understand the history, and then introduce their family and their friends and the people that they encounter to this beauty in a way that's respectful and that treats the land with some dignity and understanding.
Basically, what I'm learning based on what you said, it's not only a trip, living from one destination to another. You're taking the opportunity to teach them the history of this country. You're teaching them about the environment, and you're teaching them also, I'm guessing, to learn how to work together. But any initiative, when you come to kids, require trust. How were you able to build the trust between your organization and the parents?
That's a really good question, and I stand by this with every ounce of my, core of my body, is that it is about going and visiting and spending time in the homes of every single child that we work with. So we make a point to do all of our registrations through home visits. We make a point of going back and returning to the home to sit down for tea or coffee and have conversations with the parents and the young people to make sure that everybody understands exactly what we're doing and where we're going. I have a child. I can't imagine just sending him off with random people to go run around, in forest preserves and kayak and climb. And I would want to know who those people are. And if you're a refugee, I think that you should be treated in a way that, like, people come to your home and they explain to you, hey, this is who I am. This is who your kid is going to be with. This is the organization that we're going to register him or her for. What questions do you have? There's a cultural exchange that takes place there that a lot of people don't really understand. And I mean, in a lot of organizations, you're forbidden from going into the homes of your clients. But that's one thing that I hold very important for REACH, that we will always be going into the homes for home visits to make those connections.
Basically, when you come to having a trip, you cannot you basically have the destination, you talk about it. Can you take us to the specific of a trip to a place? What are the steps you take and what do you do? We just have a one minute.
I don't know if I have enough time to answer that question. But we follow the experiential learning model. So it's the eco-pedagogical model, which basically says that you have to introduce young people through reflection. They have to set goals at the beginning. In the middle of the day, you step back and you ask everybody how they're doing. You make adjustments as a group and as individuals. And at the end of the day, you come back and reflect. Did you meet your goals? What did you learn? What do you want to do next time? How would you do it differently? That is basically the trajectory of a typical REACH session.
Ms. Shana, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Tree. I will reach out again so we can talk more about your work, because I believe people should know and further ask you about the challenges you're facing. Again, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree.
Thank you, Alpha. Those were really great questions, and I really enjoyed answering them. Thank you.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.